We are here on this day to make history for the second time, hoping that this today will be the turning point of the war. We no longer work for NATO generals who are responsible for this suffering. We are joining the thousands of people here who envision a better world where jobs, healthcare, and education are our priorities. Not war.
Come on, hands, don't be between it. Hand time, don't let it between it. Thank you. Close that rank.
The Afghan flag remains up to be a symbol of returning Afghanistan's sovereignty. All we have is this flag, but not our sovereign land. I'd like to direct my message to the NATO representatives here in Chicago today. For what you've done to my home country, I'm enraged. For what you've done to my people, I'm disgusted. For what you've done to these veterans, I'm heartbroken. I come from a family with a military background, so I sympathize with their disappointment and being failed by the system and having their lives, their morals, and their humanity toyed with, used, and discarded. To you, they may have been pawns in your war games, but I can see them for who they truly are, through their minds, through their hearts, through their souls. The part of them you should have valued.
At this time, one by one, veterans of the wars of NATO will walk up on stage. They will tell us why they chose to return their medals to NATO. I urge you to honor them by listening to their stories. Nowhere else will you hear from so many who fought these wars, about their journey from fighting a war to demanding peace.
My name is Iris Feliciano. I served in the Marine Corps, and in January of 2002, I deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And I want to tell the folks behind us in these enclosed walls where they build more policies based on lies and fear that we no longer stand for them. We no longer stand for their lies, their failed policies, and these unjust wars. Bring our troops home and end the war now. They can have these back.
My name is Greg Miller. I'm a veteran of the United States Army Infantry with service in Iraq 2009. The military hands out cheap tokens like this to soldiers, service members, in an attempt to fill the void where their conscience used to be once they indoctrinated out of you. But that didn't work on me, so I'm here to return my Global War on Terrorism medal and my National Defense medal because they're both lies.
Stop.
I am a soldier who survived the fear of facing Uncle Sam and saying, "Sir, no sir. I won't fight for lies. Forgive me, wounded soldier, for not being there to ease your pain. I'll try on this end to bring you home now."
Any number of social needs could be met in this country if we didn't have the horrific spending of NATO and the United States. The United States has got to stop supporting abusive regimes that commit human rights crimes every bit as bad as the countries that the United States beats up on. We live in a country that spends as much on its military as the rest of the world combined. We live in a country when, combined with NATO military spending, is some 70% of world military spending. That isn't defense, that is empire. We look at the titanic, savage inequalities in our country, whether the $700 million budget deficit looming in our Board of Education, the $500 million budget deficit looming next year in our public transportation system in the city, the 100,000 homes in foreclosure in Chicago, the halving of our mental health clinics. The list goes on and on and on. These sort of things could be taken care of if we were not spending $2 billion a week on the war in Afghanistan. We are marching against NATO because NATO is the international fig leaf for American power and domination over other peoples of the world. Threats of war that the NATO alliance and the United States often issue against regimes that are opposed to it. We know that whoever is in office in January 2013, he is going to be a pro-war, pro-1% president. If we're going to change things around, it's not going to be through the ballot box in November. It's by people getting back into the streets and building our social movements, building a real opposition to both parties, which is the way that all social gains in this country, and frankly, countries around the world, have ever been won.
Hi, I'm Vermin Supreme, and whenever I'm watching some sort of moving images on a screen, it's Indymedia for sure.
Hello, my name is Won Bae, an independent filmmaker for Chicago Indymedia Center. We are here at a Chicago Military Library on Thursday night and about to see the debate between representatives from NATO and protester groups.
We're here to talk about our grievances. We are protesting on Sunday, and we're going to do a march of reconciliation and justice, where we're asking for NATO officials to come and meet us, to acknowledge us as citizens, as members of their lead country in that alliance, and to respectfully receive our medals back. We are returning our Global War on Terrorism service medals and expeditionary medals. We have decided as an organization that we no longer want to keep these tokens of symbols of failed politics in this ongoing war that's led by US and NATO.
We talk about NATO as if it was an organization by itself. It isn't really. And I think complaints about NATO are really better directed at the governments that sponsor NATO, because the NATO is the sum of its parts. I think a lot of the objection is really to U.S. policy, and I have objections about some of it myself. It has been found to be a very useful organization of like-minded Western democracies with similar interests, similar values, and similar economic systems. It is so useful, in my opinion, that if it didn't exist, we'd have to create it.
I know the title is, contains an allusion to a new NATO. I just want to make it clear I'm not in favor of a new NATO, a reformed NATO, kinder, gentler NATO. I'm in favor, absolutely, of the abolition of NATO, which is the world's only military bloc, and in my estimate, the greatest threat to world peace. NATO is the largest military bloc in human history with 28 members. In terms of its range, having conducted wars, and I'll defend the choice of the word wars, in 3 continents in 13 years, in Yugoslavia, in Afghanistan, increasingly over the border in Pakistan, in North Africa last year, where they flew almost 10,000 air sorties, combat missions over a country of 6 million people, Libya. NATO does not need to be reformed. It should have been dissolved when the Warsaw Pact was dissolved 21 years ago, and it needs to be dissolved now.
The founding of NATO came in a context, as Rick has noted, about the UN. The UN Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, came after World War II with 50 million deaths, the Holocaust, and the Soviet threat of taking over Eastern Europe, and the blockade of Berlin. So in that context, the United States foreign policy established itself to defend our friends, our Western friends in Europe, and promised them that we would come to their aid. So NATO was founded with Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. The expectation was that we would go to the aid of Western Europe should the Soviet Union invade. What do we do with NATO? Is it out of business? Because we've achieved what we set out to do in 1949. This is in 1989, 1990. In 1991, the Soviet Union disappears. And that led to 1999, when NATO decided to do, among other things, to intervene militarily on a humanitarian basis to end Milosevic's killing in Kosovo. That was a new mission. And that goes on to the question of Libya today. That was also a mission. So there's a change in what NATO's doing, and we're right to debate this issue.
But we're spending so much money on continuing these wars. The last estimate I got was it would be $4 billion annually to continue beyond 2014 training and maintaining the Afghan forces. What can we do in this country, in this, in this economy with $4 billion a year?
Again, in the public relations material that is gushing out of every sewer in Chicago in favor of NATO over the past year, I mean, it's unbelievable saturation. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs has brought in Madeleine Albright and R. Nicholas Burns, and Madeleine Albright spoke to a high school in the south side of Chicago a few weeks ago. There are NATO officials, pro-NATO spokesmen talking at high schools in the suburbs. I mean, this has been an inundation of pro-NATO propaganda, but what they fail to tell you is simple facts. It is now over 10.5 years since the invasion of Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001. This is the longest war in the history of Afghanistan. It is arguably the longest war as defined by continuous independent combat operations in the history of the United States. As of last year, the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force had 152,000 troops from 50 nations. This is far larger than Soviet peak strength, during the earlier Afghan war. And the fact that NATO has pulled together an international network of 50 nations willing to send their sons and daughters to kill and die in a useless war is an indication, again, of how dangerous a phenomenon NATO has become in the post-Cold War era. There have been statements by leading NATO military officials like Admiral James Stavridis, who's a major NATO military commander in Europe of late, praising the role of American allies in Kosovo, Yugoslavia, in Afghanistan, and in Libya. That is, wars, again, in 3 continents, and basically suggesting that the wars aren't meant to be won. They're used as testing grounds for the United States and NATO to build up a global expeditionary military force for the next war. And if I may, real quickly, the Washington Post last month had an editorial calling for NATO intervention in Mali, in northwestern Africa. Several times over the past week, the Prime Minister of Turkey has talked about invoking NATO's Article 5 Mutual Military Assistance Clause, which would mean war against Syria. This is a mechanism that evidently any major member of the alliance at any point can go to Brussels, invoke Article 5, and declare war on people in most every part of the world. It is nothing less than that.